Alright, in this video, we're going to look at some of the other common controls from the toolbox and kind of how they work in conjunction with Visual Basic, and kind of how the coding looks a little bit different, but not too bad. I'm also going to try out a little bit newer of a resolution size, so if this works a little bit better for you to see the coding, hopefully that's a little bit more helpful. Alright. This time we're going to look at a couple of the other common controls that are very common for our class. I believe there are 8 of them. We're going to look at a couple today. So last time we talked about the button. So once again, here's our button again. Again, we remember last time we talked about the name and the text of the button, right, and of also the form as well. And then also we talked about the label as well. All right, so remember we were able to click the button and then able to change the label. Now today we want to look at some of the different common controls that are available in the toolbox. So let's take a look at the checkbox for one. We're going to make 2 checkboxes, and then we're also going to look at the radio button. So we'll look at 2 radio buttons as well. Now these look very simple, and they generally are, but I want you to just kind of notice the difference between the two. Here we have our checkbox 1 and our checkbox 2, and then here we have our radio button 1 and our radio button 2. All right. A couple things to note. These are used primarily for when the user wants to select a multiple choice option. Sort of like when you're taking a test and your test has a multiple choice option, you want to choose one of the different options. So with checkboxes, you should be able to see that this is something that can be selected more than one. In other words, if you have checkbox 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4, you can select all of them if you so wished. Now, on the other hand, with radio buttons, you can only select one of the radio buttons. Right? So this does kind of change up how you view each one. Now let's say we want to do it when we select a checkbox or radio button. It's going to update our label. All right, it's going to update our label. But what do we want the label to be? Well, let's say for example that the checkbox and radio buttons, maybe they represent pizza toppings or something like that. So let's change our checkbox 1. Let's change the text of it, not the name. Let's change the text of it to cheese. All right, and then we'll change checkbox 2 over to another topping. Let's say pineapple. All right, so again here, all we've done is we've changed the text of your checkbox. Remember, the checkbox and radio buttons act just like objects, just like your button. They have a name and they have a text. For the radio button, let's change this to pepperoni. All right. And then we'll change the other one to, and let's just say for sake of example, sausage. That's probably not spelled right, but for sake of argument, it'll work for us. All right, now here's the key. With the checkbox and radio buttons, you can click on them and select them. So when we start writing code for it, you're going to want to double click on your checkbox and your radio button. So let's double click on your checkbox. All right, so there you can see we have a private sub for the checkbox. And with double click on the other one, once again you see there's another private sub for checkbox 2. Again, notice the name of it is indeed checkbox 2. And then we'll do the same for, remember this is radio button 1, and then we'll do the same for radio button 2. All right. So if we look at this, we should be able to see a couple of different things that are different from our button. So I'll double click on the button just to show you some of the differences here. This is our private sub for my button 1. Notice how the button 1 is an underscore click, meaning something happens when the button is clicked. With the checkbox, on the other hand, notice how this is a checked changed. And the same thing with a radio button. This is a checked change. Meaning, if that check is changed at any point, then the coding will happen. This also includes when you click on it or click off of it. Right? Now, one thing you should have noticed is that I don't have a private sub for my label. In theory, you can double click your label and make your label do something, right? You can have it as a label click or maybe a label check change if you really want to get crazy with it. But for right now, we're going to leave the label blank because the label is just updating based on what happened. So we don't need a private sub for our label, all right? So let's go ahead and let's go through. Let's change our checkbox. So here we'll write a comment that says something like, when the checkbox is selected. Again, that's not exactly what's happening because that's not really what check change does, but for our sakes, that will be sufficient. So we'll say when the checkbox is selected. And what we're going to do is we're going to update our label1.text. All right. We're going to say this is going to be changed to you chose, I believe this one was cheese. All right. And then in checkbox 2, once again, we'll write a quick little comment saying when the checkbox 2 is selected, and I'll go back and be a bit more specific. So we'll say when checkbox 1 is selected. All right. And then once again, we're going to update that same label. Label1.text is equal to you chose pineapple. All right. And then I'll go through and do that for each one of these. Now remember, these right here, the radio buttons, these are radio buttons. So this is when the radio button 1 is selected. All right. And then once again, we're going to update my label. All right. Label1.text is equal to you chose pepperoni. All right. Now, a couple things that you might want to do, just for your sake, is you may want to go ahead and update or write a comment after your label. This might be helpful for you in remembering what the label is doing at that point in the text. All right. Again, this one will be label1.text equal to you chose. I think this one was sausage, if I spell it correctly. All right. So now I want you to notice a couple things. Here we have our private subs for all of my checkboxes and my radio buttons. All right, so notice how what will happen is the moment that this is checked or changed from the check, it will update the label to a certain label. So let's run it and let's just kind of see if this actually works according to our coding right here. All right, so we'll hit the start button once again and we'll get it running. So hopefully this should run just a second. All right, and then here, sorry, it took a little bit longer than expected, but here is our form running. Now, if I click on button 1, remember, this is the private sub for the button 1. Notice how there's no coding in here. So therefore, nothing's going to happen when I actually click on button 1. And so if I click on it, you should notice absolutely nothing is happening. All right, so that should be what's expected because there's no coding there. Now, if I select the cheese checkbox, all right, notice how it updates the label. Again, all I'm doing is I'm selecting that checkbox or that option. Let's select pepperoni. Oh, there we go. So again, notice how I'm changing the label to exactly what I'm telling it in the coding. Let's do the same for sausage. And I want you to notice that if I'm going between the pepperoni and sausage, remember these are radio buttons. You can only select one of them. All right, notice how I can only select one or the other. Now, if I click on my checkbox here for pineapple, all right, notice how it changes to pineapple. But notice how I've selected both the cheese and the pineapple. All right, this should be a little bit different from your radio buttons, which you can select all of the checkboxes, unlike the radio buttons, which you can only select one of them. All right. Now, one thing that you're going to notice is if I unclick the pineapple, nothing happens. That may be a little bit strange because normally we expect us to be able to remove that label or undo what we just did. Unfortunately, we don't have that option because if you notice in our coding, we don't really have anything that tells it to change. Right? If we unselect it. We might learn that later on, but I want you to notice that that's not going to change. That's not a big deal for our purposes. I just kind of want you to see what's happening in the coding here. All right. Let me pause that and let me also go back to the form here. And then let's take a look at the group box. All right. So the group box is over here on the right in your toolbox. It's in the containers. And your group box is right here. Now what your group box does, if you make a group box, is it allows you to place some of your objects inside the group box. So for example, I can put these radio buttons in the group box. And what I can do is if you notice the group box, if you notice over in the properties over here, the group box also has a text and it also has a name. A group box is just another object in Visual Studio. So we'll call this group box pizza toppings. Again, we want to be as specific as possible when making our program. So this tells me that these are pizza toppings down here. Now what happens is in a group box, it will group these things, these radio buttons, these objects, inside of the group box itself, meaning they're kind of not trapped in there, but they're part of the box. And so what can happen is if I make another group box, so let's say for sake of example, I make another group box right underneath it. And let's say I make, just for sake of example, 2 more radio buttons. So radio button 3 and a radio button 4. Now notice the difference here. These 2 are part of the pizza toppings, or the group box 1, and then these 2, the radio button 3 and 4, are part of group box 2. Now if I run this, one thing you're going to notice is that if I select the pizza toppings or the radio buttons and pizza toppings, it will not matter if I select one in group box 2. All right. So again, here's my program. So let's see if I select the pizza toppings, all right, and then I can select one in group box 2, radio button. So again, notice how these are separate from each other. In other words, I can select a radio button here, and I can select a radio button here. And it doesn't affect it either way because they're in 2 separate group boxes at that point. So group boxes kind of separate your objects from each other. So anyways, hopefully that's been helpful as a way to kind of look through some of the other common controls in the group box. Again, the best way to do is just to simply practice it and play around with it a little bit more. All right.